And closing opposition.
Natalie speaking first, no preference.
And Miriam speaking second.
Great. Just a quick checkup, since this is a stream debate. I did see that most of you did write something regarding of that in the chat, but just to make sure, does anyone not consent to being streamed? Wonderful. I will do my best to write timestamps in the chat during your speeches, but please also be mindful and time keep your own speeches as well, because I miss sometimes. And without further ado, to open the debate, I'm very happy to call upon the Prime Minister. Here.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. I will be starting in 3, 2, 1, 0. Okay, panel, let's start with some definitions in order to understand what is going to be the case of open government and clearly define the terms of this debate. First of all, we want to complete the definition of mindfulness. We think that for clarity in this debate, mindfulness is a process especially to focus in the present moment. That means that you are putting all your attention in the present moment, which intrinsically means that you have to pay less attention, no attention at all to the past. That means that you are not evaluating how you are going, how you arrived to this moment, how is that you are in this moment now, and what are the actions, the things, all the process that brought you to this moment. And secondly, also this means intrinsically that you are paying less attention to the future. That means that you are not evaluating what is going to happen in the future because of this present moment, what are the consequences of this moment at its full extent, and so on, etc. We can say that it's like a kind of sense state of being. Also, we have to add that when they say that you are not judging the moment, that means that you are not putting all your rational capability in order to analyze which is happening, in order to evaluate if it is good or it is bad, but rather you are focusing all your experience in living the moment and not knowing if that's a good thing, it's a bad thing, it's something that has to be changed, it's something that has to be continued. Finally, to commercialization, we understand like all the process in order to make this very popular, like by books, by publicity, by movies, by experts or so-called experts that use their time in order to make people think that this is a good thing and a good way to believe. If someone has a clarification, that is the moment. If not, I shall continue. Okay. We have three main arguments here. The first argument is that this will provoke you to emotionally disengage from reality in your own moment, which will lead to bad decision making and also to not being able to fully live the present, which is ironically, but it's a way of not completely living the moment. And secondly, that because of the lack of judgment, you are going to be unable to change reality as you should and to provoke social change and change in your own life. And thirdly, why the commercialization itself is so bad. So starting with why this makes you emotionally disengaged from reality and don't living this to the full extent and taking bad decisions. We have 2 points of analysis, which is why it's so important, the past and the future in every moment that you are living, and why without that context, that moment has no sense at all. The first point is about the past. We think that a specific situation has completely different meanings to the people, not because they are different and has been differently educated, but because of the backgrounds that they have. Because of the effort that they put to go to that situation, every moment, every personal experience is going to be completely different for a person from one country to another, for a woman, for a man, for a rich person, for a poor person. That means that completely different thing for a guy which have everything in life, for example, to have their first job, than a person that has fought all their life to achieve that position. That means that it's completely different experience to a person which have 10 childs to have the number 11 than a person which is his first child and he's been trying to have that child for a lot of time. We think that this is very important because without that background, without understanding how much effort do you put in arriving to that situation, you are unable to completely live the moment, to completely understand what's happening to you, and therefore to live it at the full extent. We think this is crucial for the life of everyone because every day of our life, we're going to have dozens of moments which are going to compose our life. The way we feel happy in those moments is the way which at the end of the day will be build the happiness of our life. If during all those moments we are unable to judge how we arrived there, how much effort we put there, we are not going to be able to be as happy as we should, or as sad as we should, even in some situations, and therefore we're not living our life fully, which is just the other, like flipping the own sense of mindfulness, which is focusing in the present in order to live it at most. We think that is impossible without focusing also in the past and how do you arrive there. Secondly, we think that it's also happened and the consequences are almost the same because you are not able to analyze the future, understand what it means to you. That means that it's not the same thing to say to be happy because you have a new job or because you have a new relationship or a new friend, because just for that, when you are not able to analyze how this is going to change your life, what kind of plans are going to be able to imagine how you are going to play with your child in the future, to imagine how you are going to be like traveling around the world with your new friend or with your new relationship, to know how much money you are going to earn with this new investment or this new job. We think that the moment gets empty if you are not able to analyze and focus in what means that moment in the future life for you. We think that is extremely important because once again, the same impact. If you are in every day of your life not going to fully live all your moments because you are unable to really feel those moments, you're going to have an empty life. And second impact, we think that also leads to bad decision making. As for all the reasons that I say, you are going not to be able to see which is the decision which will lead to best outcomes to me. If I have to, for example, answer my wife when she's angry, or my boss when he's angry, or rather to stay quiet because I'm focusing in the moment, I'm letting the moment drive me, but I don't know if perhaps I'm losing my job, I'm losing my relationship because of the decision. We think that don't having present the past and the future makes you don't live your life at your full extent and makes that decision making is going to be very bad. If closing has any point? No? Okay, I continue. Then, second, yes.
That you think mindfulness is practiced in this way and not just as a part of life.
Sorry, repeat.
Why is it that you think that mindfulness is practiced in this way and not just as a part of life?
I mean, I think that the way this is commercialized, it looks like this is like the best way to live, that you have to focus all your attention in doing this. And I think that even in some point, you have to consider that marginally, this is going to lead to more people having mindfulness in more moments in your life. So even if you are losing just half of the moments of your life, I think that this is going to be bad. So second argument, which is that this leads to bad judgment and therefore to don't change things. We think that the analysis of this point is rather simple. If you are unable to judge if something is good or bad, if the actual situation that I am living is something that I should value, something that I should criticize, if I don't know to value if the actual moment that I'm living is something that my partner is doing bad for me, if my politician is doing a bad policy for me, I think that it's very difficult to change and to promote change in society and in my own life. It's very difficult to disengage from toxic relationships if I am not able to completely understand how bad is the thing that he's doing to me right now. I think it's very difficult that I make change in society and in political environment if I don't know how bad is the thing that the politician right now is doing bad for me, and therefore because of the lack of analysis of and the lack of judgment, it is lead to bad to worse thing. The third argument will be about the worst part of commercialization, which will be analyzed by my partner. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for a very fine speech. Quick checkup that my panel is also ready. Wonderful. Yeah. But without further ado, I'm very happy to call upon the leader of opposition. Here.
Well, can everyone hear me? Yeah? Awesome. Cool. So we tell you that mindfulness is massively valuable. We live in a society that keeps pressures to think about the future and the past, and having some moments of reflection is crucial for your mental health and your well-being in general. We tell you that the commercialization of mindfulness made that experience possible for far more people. Two things we're going to tell you. One, why we roughly believe mindfulness to be good and what this spread look like. Two, we're going to talk about how mindfulness changed as a result of this conversation, why we believe that to be valuable. There's only one big point of rebuttal that doesn't fit in to that. Basically, opening government tells you that it's important to still care about your past and your future. I think that's still going to happen for a couple of reasons. Notice that pretty much the whole society is keep pressuring us to thinking about our past and our future. You have to go to university in order to have a great job. You have to work well at university. You have to think of the promotion. So you keep being pushed in a capitalist society to perform better and better and better and think about your future. Similarly, you keep being haunted about the past. People still make fun of me for the one time I missed a yours break, but I thought also more substantially, at the moment you screw up, people are going to keep reminded of that, but you're also being punished, getting that specific kind of reminder. That's very basically how society works, and I think it makes sense to operate through people, because the moment you completely disregard the past and the future, I don't think you can enjoy your life with mindfulness very much, so it's unlikely for people to engage with it in that way. What is the comparative here? Roughly speaking, I think two things are crucial. At the moment you want to make proper decisions, you need the mental capacity to do so. You need some time to reflect, you need some time to think. Basically, what we're going to explain as our substantive is that we're in our continuous short circuit, where we basically keep getting burdened with all kinds of mental burdens and keep having to think, that some time for reflection, sometimes it basically gives your brain some rest, in the end leads to better decisions. But secondly, I think eventually you do all this to be happy. At the moment you simply can't enjoy the happiness because you're so much focused on the future product. We don't really care about how good the decisions are you make. We would rather have you make some good decisions and actually have the time to enjoy them. The rest of the build will be interwoven. First point, about more people. I want to start with the comparative because I think that was missing from HUJI. Mindfulness used to be something for some very isolated communities. It was small groups and it has a massive buying cost. Where, for example, had to travel to an Asian nation, or had to join a very specific group in order to achieve complete mindfulness. Commercialization changed this in three ways. One, there was just a massive spread. You now have books, you now have apps, you now have television shows, all focused on mindfulness. But too crucially, it also made it accessible. You no longer have to join a community, but you can simply download an app and start meditating for 1 minute a day in order to already get close to mindfulness. Your work is literally paying you for a course to do it, meaning more people can enjoy it. Yes, it might be a watered down version, anticipating CG, but it does actually mean you can enjoy it in a proper way. But thirdly, I would like to point out that the perception massively changed. Notice that mindfulness was considered very floaty or weird or vague, something for your weird aunt, but not something you as a successful business leader would do. That changed as well as the commercialization, because it was adopted by big corporations, it was adopted by successful people and actors, meaning more people actually got to enjoy it started. Why is that important? One thing these people needed most, for reasons I will give in a moment, but to also note that these are the most powerful and privileged people in society, therefore trickle down, and for example, also allowing their employees to utilize it, or others as well. Two major impacts of this spread. The first one is that we do believe mindfulness is incredibly important and beneficial. Why is that the case? Basically, I think there's a continuous pressure in society which forces you to do a lot. You need to do all the extracurriculars. You need to do incredibly well at school. You need to work hard at your job. What it effectively means is that your brain is on all the time and that you keep working really hard. Why is that problematic? Notice that that's the way we are evolutionary engineered. Notice that our modern society is incredibly recent in terms of evolutionary times, and basically, biologically speaking, we're still pretty much similar to people, I don't know, going around the forest trying to find bush to eat. That means that you're continuous fight or flight stimulation, because that's where your body makes adrenaline, that you care much about. But it also notice that your brain is using an insane amount of energy, over 20-30%, making you incredibly tired. Those kind of things lead to burnout. Those kind of things lead to all kinds of mental health problems. That's the biggest crisis, the one health crisis that improved as the moment our society progressed, given the fact that we simply aren't adapting to putting in engagement effort. Do we think mindfulness is completely helping? No, of course not. But we think it's comparatively better at the moment you take some time to meditate, at the moment you take some time to give your brain some rest. That means you can do all the things you want to do better. It also means you're more likely to enjoy life, be happy, but it also prevents all the mental health complaints we're talking about. Second, we told you that mindfulness works as sort of a trailblazer for other part of mental health aspects. Now, for example, that with mindfulness, you got walks to the forest being more appropriate. Notice that you didn't no longer have the fancy Ibiza holiday with your party, but it's also okay to take some time to have some reflect, some rest. This also means it's now far more appropriate to take a mental health day than it used to be, for example, 20, 30 years ago. We're willing to acknowledge it as like part of a broader phenomenon, but you do think the crucial thing, acknowledging, look, your brain shouldn't be on all the time. You need some time to pause, to reflect, to give your brain a pause, was quite crucial in the process and worked as a trailblazer towards making other parts of mental health more appropriate and more acceptable. I think that's the second big impact as well, because it means you help people. I think one crucial thing is to note here. Notice that the extent to which you enjoy this is for each person personal. Some people might want to spend their summer in a monastery in Tibet, actually doing the proper mindfulness. Others might be happy using an app for 10 minutes a day. We don't care. We think it's important what's best for people and what people experience to be best for themselves. Commercialization gave the option to way more people, but also a range of scala in which you can be mindful, allowing far more people to choose what they found most valuable and to combat the toxic influence I am talking about. Second aspect, how mindfulness has changed. We tell you that mindfulness has changed into three crucial ways. One, as said before, you can now cater to different people. You have more options to choose how you want to be mindful. Two, the buy-in is significantly lower. You no longer need to join a community, but you can simply get the books and an app and simply try to become mindful that way. The third one, crucially, is that you now have scrutiny and competition. I know it sounds a bit weird, but notice in the case it's no longer the fact of like some religious leaders, but really something all people can enjoy, and you have different kind of providers and different kind of trainers and different
to engage CG
in one specific thing. No, sorry, you're way too late. Okay, so why do we believe this is a good thing? I think there are two massive impacts. One, we think this makes it valuable to far more people, because the original mindfulness, like the original version, had a massive buy-in, but only worked for a very specific amount of people who are willing to sacrifice a lot and who really wanted to do that. On the other side of the house, far more people can actually use it because the changes is described. But secondly, we think you now have accountability. Notice that the case in the original mindfulness-based community, there are a community with one individual has a massive amount of power because that person could tell you how to be mindful. They are leading the community, which is incredibly hard to leave because you're now on a track and a path to mindfulness. The incredible truth is that many people simply abuse the power. There have been cases of sexual allegations, there have been cases of other kinds of abuse towards this small group of people. Notice that the survivors could do anything because they were completely dependent on the person and pretty much had no opt-out or no possibility whatsoever. We changed that because on the our side of the house there's way more scrutiny because there's way more attention, but also on the our side of the house there's actually an alternative because you can read this path to mindfulness in a different way. And you see the alternatives to the kind of specific thing your leader tells you. At the end of the day, it's simple. We tell you that mindfulness is now an option for way more people, but that the people also get way more out of mindfulness because it's catered to them. I'm very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for a very fine speech. Quick checkup that my panel is also ready. Then I'm very happy to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. Hee.
Do you hear me? I'll be starting in 3, 2, 1 now. So one explicit rebuttal to OO, and then I'll continue building our case. So basically one bunch of alignment in the case in OO is that by mindfulness, you can basically avoid burnout in a life in which you have many inputs. And it's very difficult not to iterate all those inputs and be stressed by a lot of inputs. There's 2 rebuttals I want to do here. The first is that it is unclear why is there not a different narrative which is not mindfulness, not to have many input at the same time, but rather have less input at the same time without focusing in just the present, but rather as the future or the past, but not having such a lot of input. But most importantly is this argument concedes the premise that whenever you are not in pause, as they say, you'll be focusing in the present. The problem with this is that for many people in the world, the present is not very good. The present is a moment in which they have problems. It's a moment in which they face a lot of difficulties. It's a moment in which they have a future, in which they are facing things that are very, very, very difficult for them. The fact that they can focus in the future makes many times more easy to them to stay and to support the present because they live a life with the expectation of having a better future. So we believe that it's fundamentally evil to make people whose life is bad, which in most cases, in the vast majority of the world, present is very bad, poor people, people who live deprived, to need to present and to live in the moment when the moment is really bad, and going and focusing in the future can save them to supporting that very bad future. So that on the presentialism. So what does Roel told you from Javi's speech? Javi told you basically that you will disengage from the moment, and this is very bad. The rebuttal that they make is, well, but no, totally, not at every moment, just a few times, just whenever you want. Look at first, this refutation concedes the premise of the case that in most cases, in many cases, or at least in relevant cases, you will be detaching yourself from those emotions. And what we tell to you is that this will happen in many moments. It will happen in the most crucial moments, at least for 2 reasons that we believe that very important. First, that if you tell and you believe that really mindfulness can help you, and when it doesn't, you'll believe that is confirmation bias, that you're not applying it too far, that you're not doing it at every moment, that if you did it more times, probably it will work more. Your teacher, your course, your conversation thing will tell you, do it more, practice it more. You'll see how it goes. So why you'll be focusing in that you do more times in your life. And also with the Pygmalion effect, when you see that something has worked, then you'll see, oh, okay, due to mindfulness. So you'll also be prone to apply it more, especially if your life is especially miserable and somehow you have a good moment in the present, and then you think it's mindfulness. The most likely thing is that you apply it in a lot of instances, if you like, maybe not 100%, but maybe 80%, which I think it's even. Let's add more material to the debate. Javi already explained to you and impacted the first argument how we believe there is evil as it detaches you from the present life. But secondly, and to expand on the second argument Javi told you, we believe that this worsens the decisions that you take because of the lack of relevant factors being inputted into the equation. This presentialism in which you live fails to input two relevant things in the equation of your decisions. First, that future factors are relevant to understand why you undertake decisions that might be difficult but are relevant to your future. So for example, sacrificing happiness as a present moment, not taking drugs at the present moment, not having this moment of happiness in this present moment, which would sacrifice a relevant future. So the fact that you can iterate future into your present decisions is very important to give off, to lay off things that even if the present can get you things, probably will drop things that are important in the future. And second, the fact that you don't input past factors fails to give you relevant context on why things in the present, even if bad, should be supported because they're good for your life. For example, I've been 10 years with my girlfriend. Sometimes I argue with her. Sometimes she yells at me. The fact that if I just judged her by the moment when she yelled at me, when she told me that I was a bad person, if I broke up with her just based on the present, I wouldn't be valuing and iterating to the future how those 10 years would be relevant for me and how are there enough to support a moment in my life in which I am not happy. This sense of presentialism, what makes you is to tell that just in this moment you must be concentrated, and the past things that might be happy for your life and that input you a good future are not important. Why is this very important? Because you're trading off, even if the best case of OO is true, you're trading off present momentary happiness for something much more important, which is the difficulty to commit to future important things, the break to attachment to things that have impacted you in the past. We believe that it is very important given the following iteration, which is many times you will fail. You will fail to apply this mindfulness thing because of the same logic that they tell you, okay? You apply 90%, but sometimes you won't be able to. So even when you fail, you see how you've ruined your life for a decision which was presential. For example, I dropped my girlfriend because this mindfulness thing, then I am regretting the thing for the rest of my life, especially when I fail. For that thing, we believe that you take worse decisions, especially impactful given when you fail. You acknowledge the worst of it. Lastly, we believe that this also must be banned because it will be used when commercialized to take advantage of people. So look, this will intervene the rebuttal to OO when they say the access is good. We don't believe that access generally is good, so we oppose to it and we oppose to commercialization based on the following logic. People with problems will probably try to seek ways to detach from those problems, to stop those problems, and they will buy into whatever narrative they're given based on desperation. If your life in the present is really bad, even if you believe that things will change, you will probably go to seek for those things like mindfulness and things. Not only this, but commercials, the people that selling mindfulness, they know that there's people who go through moments in life where are very difficult. Hence, when they give you this influence, when they try to commercials, they are taking advantage of you. They're taking advantage of the fact that they know that your consent is biased, and the moment when you give it because you take it on the premise that you're very bad to the situation. They will reinforce this whenever they're teaching you, giving you the course, because it's the base of commercialization that you keep to buy. Therefore, we believe that it is a sale that happens in a moment in your life when you're especially biased in consent, and therefore must be opposed and not commercialized because it's specially targeted, as I told you, to those people who are having a bad moment. We think those people shouldn't be opting into this narrative which worsens their life decisions, which impacts them with worse decision taking, especially in a moment where their consent is specially biased. For those reasons, very tragic to those.
Sorry, mistake. I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for a very fine speech. Quick checkup that my panel is also ready. Then I am very happy to call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Can you hear me? So I think that we win this debate on 2 grounds, and note that OG only engaged with one of them. The first thing, and that's the first contention, is that commercialization opened up mindfulness to people and therefore was good. OG consensus is bad. I will engage in this trade-off. The second thing, and note that OG doesn't engage with this, is that commercialization actually created checks and balances for an incredibly isolated community that otherwise was very trending towards problematic and manipulative behavior. I think you're actually more likely to get mindfulness junkies without commercialization. I think on both of those grounds, we win the debate. Even if OG proves that mindfulness for some people is bad, I think we're able to prove that for the vast majority of people, it is a overwhelmingly positive experience, but also that for the people that were already engaged in it, it becomes a better experience. Let's start with the contention about whether spreading mindfulness to more people is actually good. And note that the main contention from OG is that people become mindfulness junkies and can therefore no longer solve their problems. I have a few issues with this, but note mostly that they don't really prove how mindfulness contributes to this, right? First of all, the OG case only works when people become brainwashed in mindfulness and don't keep their own critical eye towards their life. I think that there are 2 reasons why that is unlikely to occur. First of all, commercialization made mindfulness a very low-key thing. So you read a book, you have an app, and you meditate every day. That doesn't mean that you start not knowing that your life has issues, right? It just means that you give yourself coping mechanisms to make them more approachable. And that's also my second and crucial point. Mindfulness is not about running away from your issues. It is about embracing the present, not being afraid of the present, but accepting what is going on and making sure that you become more relaxed and more capable of dealing with your issues. I don't think OG has ever proven to you why people are unwilling to look at their problems at the moment that they start accepting the present as maybe not unsurmountably awful. So we tell you in that sense that mindfulness actually gives people the tools to deal with their issues, but also that mindfulness won't take over people's life as much that they won't be able to deal with it anymore. The second thing is that even if mindfulness is bad, right? Note that mindfulness can also teach you what doesn't work for you. So worst case, you spend 2 years of your life thinking that meditating will solve all of your issues. I don't know like what the direct harm of it is, right? Maybe you break up with a girlfriend that was perfectly nice, but that doesn't mean that those 2 years didn't teach you anything, because they still taught you that maybe you need to relax. They still taught you that maybe you shouldn't get as caught up in the stress about the past and the future, and that sometimes you should appreciate what you do have. So even if at the end of the road it wasn't worth it, that doesn't mean that eventually the maybe few suboptimal decisions that you make are something that should be regretted, right? And lastly, even if mindfulness in and of itself is not good to spread, note that the commercialization of mindfulness had a lot of spillover effects, right? Because mindfulness normalized a lot of behavior that was otherwise seen as spiritual. It normalized standing up for your mental health, and because it showed the necessity to stand up for mental health, as all of a sudden it became so widespread and people were amazed by the fact that millions all of a sudden were standing still by the fact that they were stressed out. But second of all, it showed that there are tools to deal with this stress, that stress isn't unsurmountable, but that there are different ways of dealing with it. And even if it's not mindfulness, it can even be simple things, right? Like yoga, like meditation, like taking a walk in the forest. So even if the behavior of people doesn't take on mindfulness, mindfulness normalized behavior that makes sure that people take care of their mental health. I think that is my main rebuttal on the characterization. But lastly, I just want to briefly deal with a very big part, and that is that you are going to basically make very bad decisions. I think that the main direct response here is that mindfulness takes away a very big part of judgment that often blocks conflict resolution. Because if you are as a person not into mindfulness, and like the DPM said, right, you're in an argument with your girlfriend, if you don't do mindfulness, you are more likely to, for instance, try to get the win in the argument, right, instead of finding a compromise. Mindfulness teaches you acceptance. It teaches you to relax, to take a breath, but crucially also to realize that everyone deals with the same stress and anxieties, and that you're not the only one who deals with these thoughts. That means that it's easier to sympathize. It is easier to not make an argument just because you want to make an argument. And it teaches you to get over your own judgments because that person might be worth fighting for. The second response that I want to give to this is that if we make people more relaxed, which I don't think OG ever argues that mindfulness doesn't do, that means that people are more equipped to deal with their issues, because anxiety can be an incredibly paralyzing experience, and therefore adding mindfulness to the equation means that people have small moments to reflect on their day, to make problems seem surmountable and have the relaxation to overcome them. So I think at the end of this class, right, I don't think OG really has any leg to stand on. In the worst case, they might make a suboptimal decision. I think we have two secured benefits. First of all, anxiety relief, a moment where you think about nothing because our brains are constantly running in a capitalist society. You appreciate what you do have and you have less stress and less judgment. So at the end, I think that mindfulness adds relaxation where we're living in a capitalist and perfectionist society. Before I move on, I want to take a POI of CG.
What would you say, when are you more likely to act? When you feel completely happy with yourself, or when you realize that there is something horrible going on?
But mindfulness isn't about being completely happy, right? It is just about accepting that moments are what they are. That if you are in pain, that pain is okay and part of the human experience, and that you don't need to run away from it because you can handle it. It is not unsurmountable. It's something you can deal with. I think that is a far more realistic characterization of mindfulness than just people jumping around in the field and being happy around everything, right? People still feel their issues, but now they learn how to deal with them. Lastly, do people receive better mindfulness, and do we actually create checks and balances? Know that a DPM didn't engage with any of this. We give you three distinct reasons. First of all, there's competition. That means that you have an improvement of services and you no longer get people that are scamming you, because if you're scamming people, you get bad reviews and the commercialization spread that information. Second of all, the diversity that we're able to provide. There are people that need different things. For some people, yoga works. For some people, meditation works. In commercialization, you're able to provide that. And lastly, rules explain to you that many mindfulness before commercialization have manipulative, problematic, and sometimes even harassing behavior. At the moment that Netflix make documentaries, that there are bad reviews, that means that we're able to account for that. For all of these reasons, you've no choice but to vote OO.
I'd like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for a very fine speech. Quick checkup that my panel is also ready.
Good.
Then I'm very happy to call upon the Member of Government. Here.
Can you hear me? Luca Ugassi. Okay, I'll start in 3, 2, 1. A bit more characterization what mindfulness actually is, then 2 extensions about how people become more passive, and secondly, why is this probably harmful for mental health. Now, firstly, what is mindfulness? I think that it's a meditation state, right? It's a state where you don't hold to your feelings and thoughts, but rather look at them as if they were happening before you. Also, this is not something that you just acquire easily, right? It's a process through learning how to meditate. The things that our opening really wants to talk about, like full mindfulness, is something that maybe only Buddhist monks can do. This is a process of learning that takes a lot of time. Secondly, what is commercialization? And what is firstly comparative to this commercialization? OO claims nobody has access to mindfulness. This is just not true. Mindfulness has been around for a long time, right? It's been a part of Gestalt therapy since its beginning. It has become a part of cognitive behavioral therapy since the 90s. So we think that comparative is getting this through therapists rather getting to it through other things. And what is this commercial things that you get mindfulness from? It's self-help books. It's apps such as Headspace. There are a huge number of such apps. There's our experts programs, especially in the workplace, in school, and things such as that. And what is important for commercialization as well is that all of these people want to gain money and profit from the fact that they are giving you this mindfulness, meaning that they have an incentive to push it everywhere, put it in the media, internet, advertise it, and it is shown, it is now everywhere as a solution for everything. Now, why do we become more passive? And this is also a rebuttal to OO's case. Right. We first think and we agree that this is a kind of a state of acceptance, meaning that you look to your emotions, look to your thoughts without actually going with them, without trying to experience them to their fullest, but rather saying being into them, in surrendering to them, or surrendering to your anger or anything else. It also means that you have a certain responsibility and ability to deal with these emotions. And this is the message that you gain, because if you have the possibility to be mindful, then you don't have to be fully surrendered to your sadness or fully surrendered to any other feelings. We think that this is an extremely problematic idea. Why? Because emotions are the main motivators in your life. The fact that I'm feeling angry is probably for a reason, and that reason is injustice. The fact that I'm feeling sadness is probably because I'm in some kind of a terrible situation, meaning that there are external things for which I'm feeling these feelings. Now, because of these external things, that also means that I can do something about them, right? I can change my job, I can talk to somebody who makes them sad. But if the truth is that I can deal with this, firstly myself through mindfulness, and secondly that I don't have to surrender to these feelings, then I lose my main incentive to be active in my life. This is especially important when we are talking about workplace that OO wants to talk about. The workplace where we have the biggest commercialization of mindfulness through huge amount of programs in HR that promote this to their employees. Why do we think that this is so problematic? Because when you feel terrible, as they say, when you feel tired, when you feel that you are on the verge of a burn or whatever, then this is the situation where you are mostly motivated to do something about the situation, because this is the situation when you feel, okay, my boss is doing something wrong. Maybe I cannot take so many working hours and things such as that. But if I'm promoted with mindfulness, it takes firstly this half an hour or whatever when I feel this emotion with most intensity and when I am most motivated to do something. Secondly, it tells me I can deal I should deal with individually, meaning not to go to like a traditional way, go to my other employee and talk with him about whether he's experiencing the same thing, but rather dealing with it myself, meaning that I don't organize and see all of my problems as a group problem, but rather as something that I feel as individual. This stops us from any action because we become firstly more passive, but secondly, and especially important in the workplace, with any kind of collective action, because I don't engage other people on this problem, but rather dealing with them on my own. Meaning that because we live in a capitalist system, as they say, which is treating workers in a terrible ways, gives them too much hours, makes them burned and so on, this is the situation that enables them to keep this, and because of the commercialization is shown as a solution for all of this. Secondly, let's deal with the mental health, but before that, I'll take a POI from closing. Okay, no opening.
So capitalist society constantly tells you to push through your emotions and cooperate in the economic system. Mindfulness allows you to sit down, accept, and figure out ways to overcome your struggles. How is this not a good complement to a capitalist society?
Okay, thank you. I don't, society can or cannot, like, I mean, it can push you to go to your feelings, right? But when feelings become overwhelming, they become a great motivator. And the cases we are describing are exactly people feeling that. Now about mental health. Like, because of the commercialization, the mindfulness is showed as a solution to everything because of the fact that this is good for commercialization, right? You can, if it's a problem for all solutions, then you can sell more books, more apps, have more public speaking, and so on. This means that even if mindfulness is really useful for such things such as mild anxiety or mild depression, the things that you do that other people who might have no usage of this still use it, although it doesn't help them. So even if they have benefits to certain people, they also harm a lot of people who don't get benefits from mindfulness. Comparatively to this, these people are aware that they need help, right? They made already first step if they bought the book, if they downloaded the app and things such as that. This means that comparatively, if there was no commercializations, if they weren't bombarded that this is a solution to everything, they might go to therapy and get help that they really deserve. Or at least if mindfulness is a solution to them, as I tell you, it's something that you learn. So at least they will have a therapist to lead them to this process and make them more likely to deal with this. For all these reasons, I beg you to vote CG.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for a very fine speech. Quick checkup that my panel is also ready. Cool, then I'm very happy to call upon the member of opposition. Here, here.
Okay, we think this debate is missing just basic characterization of why people go to mindfulness, what types of situations they are likely to use it in, and what types of situations they are not likely to use it in, and what does that mean in terms of why it is a positive net benefit for most of the people who are going to use it, right? Because we think that the thing is that probably government's damages are not very likely. It's the point where you ask yourself, this is a tool. This is something that you learn to do, like many other psychological tricks that your therapist is likely to teach you, which CG is talking about. And the question is, when people are likely to use it, and why those situations specifically are good. So those are going to be the two main things we're going to talk about. But just one general point of rebuttal, they tell you, look, we think the alternative is that you go to therapy, you get this in therapy, and that's going to be amazing, right? But we think that the thing is that exactly for these normal people that she mentions at the that the speaker mentions at the end, who don't necessarily want to go to therapy, who don't feel that they have a very big problem, but just have normal daily problems, like, you know, feeling maybe my relationships aren't good enough. I sometimes experience low self-esteem. Sometimes I have haunting feelings of shame, but this is not like something that is so ruining my life that I need to please be quiet. Unlikely to go to therapy, but still these things can really help them. We think these are the relevant actors in this debate who are not going to get it from CB. So let's dive into what mindfulness realistically looks like. So first of all, we think that most people don't want to be detached from reality and always focus on the present moment, every single moment of their life, right? But what do they feel, right? Often people in the normal world, right? They feel stressed, they experience negative feelings such as having low self-esteem or shame and embarrassment in social situations. We feel that maybe the relationships are not deep enough. They have all these really daily problems that most of us have experienced at some point in our lives, right? And then they feel, because of the commercializations, they feel that mindfulness might be able to help them. And then they learn this psychological tool, right, which is a tool that you can employ. You need to actively employ. This is not like something that takes over your mind like hypnosis. I don't know if hypnosis does that either, right? But this definitely doesn't. And you can decide when you want to use it, right? So we need to ask ourselves, when are they likely to use it, right? So we think that this is either when they are actively experiencing a negative emotion. Like right now I am feeling shame. I said something very embarrassing in my conversation with my boss, and I find that this is constantly in my mind and I can't overcome it and can't do other things and having low self-esteem at the moment, or when they feel that it's going to help them to solve the type of problems that they set up to solve. Like, now this can help me have better relationships, now this can help me be happier, and this is when I need to employ this too, right? We think that this means that probably it is very unlikely that I'm going to disregard my future, because at the moments that I am contemplating my future and thinking about how I'm going to plan the things that I'm going to do, I'm unlikely to desire to not think about the future and thinking about other things, because this is what I'm focusing on right now. If I am very successful and I'm happy with my success, I'm unlikely to disregard all the efforts that I make, because it is making me happy to think about all the efforts that I made. And probably when I fight with my girlfriend, I'm very unlikely to just dump her after 10 years of a relationship, because, oh, now in the middle of the argument, I will focus on mindfulness, forget everything between us, and dump her. Like, what the fuck? People are not insane. Okay, then we think that they tell us, look, in CG, there are external reasons for my feelings, and I'm going to lose all the incentive to solve them and things like that. Right? So first of all, notice that mindfulness is not like a magical thing that makes all your other thoughts and feelings disappear. Even like very good people at meditation don't actually just never experience negative emotions, never feel there are problems in their life. You're definitely still aware of your life. You'll definitely still feel that mindfulness is not the only way to deal with it. And that, for example, speaking to your colleagues is going to make you feel better. You're probably not doing it 24 hours a day, every single day, because this actually takes mental effort. Like it says in the info site, this is something you actively mentally need to do. And thus, probably when you're stopping doing it, you still are aware of the problems, maybe a little bit more calmer about them, but still are aware of the problems and are likely to solve them. So that's just highly unlikely. Before we continue about the cases where people do use it and why those are so extremely important, yeah, HUJI, sure.
Yeah, so for achieving mindfulness, you obviously don't need to do it like 100% of the time, every decision in your life. But the fact is that if you're trying to implement it, probably you'll achieve it in many occasions. Maybe not in every occasion, but in many occasions. It is weird that your case is premised on the fact that it doesn't work.
I mean, I don't know. That doesn't mean that's what I'm doing 24 hours of my life. I only code things when I have a problem which is related to computers. Right? I know how to read, but that is not the only thing I'm doing in my life. I know how to talk to people in a way that I've learned over the years how to be very emotionally intelligent and listen to their problems. That doesn't mean every person I meet on the street, I'm like, oh, so how are you doing? Let me talk about your feelings. Like I use it when it's relevant with like my husband or my close friends when I actually need to use this skill. Like people don't use this skill all the time because they have it. They use it when it's relevant. So look, we think that first of all, often people just find it hard to focus on the things that are important to them, right? We think that everybody experiences at some point this feeling that, oh my God, I want to focus on the interesting project I'm working on right now, but I can't because I'm too busy worrying about the promotion or the fight I had with my husband yesterday. I want to focus on being with my friends or with my kids, but I'm too worried about the things that are happening in my job. This is something that happens to everyone. Mindfulness gives people the tool to solve it, to put those things out of their mind for the moment and just enjoy being with their friends or with their kids or the really interesting projects they are doing, and think about those things later, not forget them, but just put them aside for now so you can enjoy the other things in your life. This is also super important for relationships, right? Because in relationships, if people feel you're preoccupied, then that means that they are not enjoying the relationship and don't appreciate it as much, right? Because if your friends always feel that you are half of your mind is somewhere else, they don't want you to tell them they don't want to tell you their deepest problem because they feel that you are not listening, and that means that you become worse friends because they don't trust you as much as they can actually participate with you, right? If your children feel that you're not fully focusing, they're going to feel less affection, and they're going to develop less close connection, which is going to be with you for the rest of your life. This fact that you have less trust and less closeness in your relationship. We also think that mindfulness very importantly helps you deal with feelings of shame, right? Because we think that the thing is that if I make a mistake and I don't have this tool, people, what often they do is they tend to blame themselves. They tend to say, the reason I made this mistake is because I have a character flaw. Something with me is wrong. I am just not good enough at the things that I'm doing. They have like a type of imposter syndrome or very low self-esteem. And they feel that they're broken up and screwed. And as a result, it's inevitable that they're going to make the same mistake again. And they just cycle into this shame and embarrassment and are unable to solve it. We think that mindfulness gives them the ability at the moment to be like, okay, I made a mistake, this is true, but let's look at it maybe a little more calmer, with less judgment. I did the best that I could at the moment. This is what I was capable of. Let's think about it a little later when I'm a bit more calmer and see how I can actually learn how to grow and develop from this. We think for normal people who don't have therapy, this is still super, super important for all these reasons, of course.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for a very fine speech. Quick check up that my panel is also ready. Then I'm very happy to call upon the government whip.
Am I audible? Yeah. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the screen for a moment. You can hear me? Okay, 3, 2, 1, go. Notice, when Netta tells you that the incentive of these people is to get as much money as possible, this means that it is portrayed to you as a solution for everything. Because if it's a solution for everything, then you sell more apps, then you sell more videos, then you sell more books. That means that the tool they want to use is not a tool that suits sometimes. It's a tool you believe can help you always, even when it can't. And when you fail, you blame yourself. 2. When Seal tells you that this is a strategy you use max for an hour because it's very difficult, once again, see Eta's characterization, this means that at points in your day, you're still frustrated, you're still angry, you still have big issues. However, at times when it's crucial, when you're feeling the biggest intensity, and notice this is a very clear, different characterization from OG, is where we say these are the points when you make your decisions. At that point, you start to feel calm. You separate yourself, and you no longer say it's the capitalist system, it's me, because I'm the one who should be mindful. I should distance myself. I should no longer feel sad. I should solve it. I should feel better. And that's when you become passive. Not because you're a Buddhist monk, as the opening government wants to tell you, but because at the very specific moment when you can make this crucial decision, you decide to distance yourself. You decide to say, it is up to me to solve myself. Notice, this is an agenda pushed by big companies because they want their HR companies to tell you it's your fault. It's your fault you're burnt out. It's your fault you can't handle this. And that's when you don't solve the issue. A few points of response. So first of all, to CEO, when it's used always because you never know what to do. But moreover, it's highly abusive because they're selling it constantly to you that it's going to help you, and then you're going to feel it's amazing. Two, on the idea of normal people using it to get better off. One, we say you become more passive, which means you don't solve the most important issues in your life, which means these issues get worse and worse and worse until the point you can no longer cope with them using mindfulness mechanism. And this is especially harmful given Eta's characterization of this being an incredibly difficult skill, because you cannot learn it to cope with the biggest issues. And if you do not solve them at one point, you will simply be unable to do so. At that point, you get burnout. At that point, your little technique of meditating for half an hour is not enough. However, what is the alternative? We say that a majority of the people who need the help would likely go to therapist, because notice it's a higher barrier to go to therapist than to download I don't know, Headspace, I think it's called, or a certain app. And you go to the app and you think, okay, this should solve my issue. Or if I work enough, it's going to solve my issue. And then you simply take the easy way out. The alternative is you feeling and acknowledging that you have an issue, but you have no other alternative than going to therapists. To therapists that use this mindfulness technique in order to teach you how to accept your issues that you cannot solve, but also to teach you when you should not use mindfulness, when these are issues that you should fight against. And this is the best situation we have. Okay, let us deal with OO. A majority of the OO case is that you're going to get burnt out and you're going to get horribly stressed because it's a fight or flight instinct. And then they say, currently you live in a capitalist system that tells you that you should work. What mindfulness tells you is that you should distance yourself and accept things. You should not judge them. You should not judge the capitalist system. You should not judge what happened to you. You should simply accept this. You should let go of your anger. You should let go of your stress. You should let go of your emotion and try to see how to go forward. Now, why is this crucial? Because then you have two alternatives. One is mindfulness telling you you should solve it by yourself. Or if you don't have mindfulness, you're likely to see this as a systemic issue of we all need to change the system. It's not up to me to meditate. It's up to all of us to solve these horrible companies. It's up to us to fight the HR system. And this is what Eta tells you. You lose this collective action because you become alienated. It's up to you to go and meditate. It's not up to you to go and talk with your coworkers, to get a bit more angry and see we should fight. All of us are angry. You should go in a small room, meditate for half an hour as the opposition bench wants you, and then you're no longer angry. But notice, you no longer have the incentive to fight. So even if on the OO side, you believe that you can change this issue because you feel less stressed, you lose also the incentive to change this because you are no longer so strongly emotionally engaged with this and you accept the situation as it exists. We say this is perfect abuse, especially when it's being taught to you by the people who have an incentive to screw you over. Because these are people who want you to work more. These are people who don't want you to fight. They want you to simply work on. And this is what happens when it becomes commercialized. You simply do not fight it. Two, they say, opening opposition says it's easier to buy in. But that's exactly the issue. Because you buy in when you don't need to. You don't learn the full technique because it can take years to actually learn how to distance yourself from your anger, to stop in a moment of complete rage and say, okay, now I'm going to meditate, go somewhere and relax for a bit. It's very difficult to do this. And even if you do it to a certain extent, it's unlikely that you're going to shift it to your entire life. So this means that it doesn't fully solve your issues, but it shifts the blame to you because you constantly feel that you're not the one who's doing enough. Thirdly, on the idea of the spillover effect, we say that because these people who commercialize it do not want you to solve the issues, they want you to need more and more and more help. They never actually even want to teach you the real techniques. They want you to actually rely on them more and more. That leads us to conclude that we simply don't have the solutions. We simply rely on these books as much as possible, and I will take opening. Yes.
Okay, so your life still sucks. 1 hour a day isn't going to make a difference in whether you want to overthrow capitalism, but it does allow you to cope with a horrible system and still take care of your mental health in a proper way.
Okay, so one thing, you can actually quit your job and say, I will not work here. I will work somewhere else. Second thing is you don't become passive and allow your problems to get bigger. But lastly, why we take it over OG? One, we don't rely on a characterization of everyone being a Buddhist monk and completely unrelated to your girlfriends, to your past, to your future. We actually give you a concrete mechanism as to when you decide things, when you can change something, and when mindfulness plays a role. Two, we show you that on a general level, the people who need the help the most are not the ones who use it because they believe a small app is enough to help them. We show you that the incentive of the people who actually sell you mindfulness, who teach you these techniques, is not to learn you effective ones. On the comparative, if you learn it from a therapist, this person likely goes in because he wants to help people, or he's controlled by the association of therapists. And lastly, because we show you that you become passive at the moment when it matters most, because you accept your emotion and don't use it to guide your decision making, to guide your anger and to promote any kind of change. Your problems get bigger, and because of all of this, you cannot resolve them, and you, in the long run, do not get happier. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the previous speaker for a very fun speech. Quick checkup that the panel is ready as well. Then I am very happy to call upon the opposition whip. Here.
Let me tell you why we're going to win this debate. We're going to win this debate because we're the only ones who actually explain to you how it is that people are likely to use this tool in our lives, how it is that corporations are likely to sell them and why, and do not imagine this as a crazy extremist version in which either human beings or corporations think that this is the only thing that has ever happened in anyone's life and all solutions for everything, right? We think that a more nuanced understanding of the way people incorporate tools into their lives and the way they access them as one of the tools in their many toolbox leads to the understanding that this is the most likely use case, is the best use cases, and is the ones that we talked about, meaning that we get the benefits without the significant harms that governments want to talk about, and that is why we're winning. Let's talk about that therefore on the two questions. One, well, how do people use this? And the two, why is this in fact such a wonderful thing if used in this way, and why is this so much more important? Again, we're also going to weigh our impact against openings in that. So how do people actually use it in this situation, right? Because here's what we got told. So opening government tried to tell us, look, you're totally disconnecting from everything. You don't, you use it as an excuse to make impulse decisions. Like if you want to, you no longer think about past or future, blah, blah, blah. So you don't want to so you want to do drugs or things along those lines. Opening up is to tell them that you're not totally disconnected. People are still going to remind you of your past. The capitalist society is still going to remind you of your push for the future. You can't ignore literally all consequences. But we think this doesn't fully engage with the issue, not of the fact that obviously you can't live your life entirely without thinking about consequences, but with impulse decisions that you're still going to use this as a tool to make. With the idea that you're still going to use it sometimes for the wrong use. Sometimes you're still going to say, okay, I want to be able to take drugs now, so this is what I'm going to do, or whatever it is. And that sometimes it's going to lead to bad decisions. Even if opening government have approved the entirety of that case, opening opposition doesn't respond to the more nuanced version of that case in terms of the fact that it is still likely to be misused under certain circumstances. Netta is the only one who actually engages with the way and why this is likely to not be used in that way in the vast majority of cases, right? Why is that? Because what she tells you is that the reason that people go is they don't just randomly hear about mindfulness as a thing and they're like, cool, cool, cool. So mindfulness, excellent. I'm going to do this with everything in my life forever. They go to that because they want a tool to deal with specific problems and specific issues that arise in their life. Because they're having relationship problems, because they're having issues engaging with their life in a full manner, because they feel like they're always stressed, because they feel like they can't connect to their spouse or their children or whatever it is. And they go and get these tools that are sold to them as solutions to specific problems because that is the thing they want. What that means is that furthermore, we tell you that they're taught to be used that way, right? The people who teach them want people to be successful. They don't want them all to be crazy, like drag addicts or people who have never attempted to succeed in the future of their life or anything like that. That is not a good commercial for my product if those are the kinds of people who are advocating for it and those are the kinds of people who come out of my workshops. What that means is that it's taught as a question as when you're in a situation and you want to say, how can I engage with this better? There are certain situations in which using mindfulness is the right response. There are certain times when you're asking yourself this question, okay, so how do I take a step back and not let the anger get the better of me, but actually think about what is happening and what is making me angry and engage with that thing and not like throw my anger out onto the entire world? How do I do that? And that is when mindfulness might be useful. When you want to try and understand your partner better, you want to understand what is happening, mindfulness might be useful. When you want to disconnect from things that you can't solve, mindfulness might be useful. Whatever it is, that is the point at which you're being taught to use those tools in those specific ways. What it means is that the likely use cases are the use cases that we talked about and that opening opposition want to talk about. We're going to analyze why those are necessarily the ways in which they're going to be used. What that means is, for instance, that in order to want to take drugs, for example, you'd have to actively say to yourself, I'm going to use this tool as particularly because I actively want to, I know that this is going to be harmful to me, and I want to not think about the fact that it is going to be harmful to me. We think that those are incredibly rare cases in terms of the way in which you're going to have access to this tool to be given, the way it's going to be sold to you, what's going to be likely to be told to you that it makes sense to be used. But that if you're asking yourself that question anyway, and if you're making that calculus in order to engage this tool, that you actively want to not think about the rest of your consequences, you would likely have other things that are going to push you to do that, like literally taking the drugs themselves because they stop you from thinking about that thing, right? We don't think that in this situation, that is therefore the likely way in which you are using this tool, and open government situations are the relevant ones, which is why we think that we're the only ones to explain why that is the case, and we're the only ones to explain why it is that this is the way in which it is used and why we get the use cases that we're talking about. So what are those use cases and why are they so good, right? Opening opposition tried to tell us that what we get out of this is this idea of like better mental health, right? One, this like spread the idea of mental health in general and is what led to the idea of more mental health. We don't understand why this is necessarily the thing that led to that and why it isn't just a revolution that occurred concurrently and people engage with the idea of mental health in general, but it also we still understand the extent to which the idea of meditating every now and again actually helps solve all of the mental health problems that we've talked about. We don't think that opening opposition necessarily explain that to that extent. We give you much better explanations in terms of the kinds of things that this is actually be used to solve on a localized level. Things like being able to focus on the moment right now and things that you just can't solve. Like I can't solve my problem at work because I'm not at my job right now, and I want to be able to stop thinking about it, to spend time with my kids and connect them. That's really, really important to people in terms of developing those relationships. And as I explained to you, in terms of understanding where my emotions are actually coming from so that I can communicate them properly to the people around me and take a moment to think about that and actually understand what it is that I'm upset or happy or angry or sad about or whatever it is. And the idea of not obsessing over my guilt and allowing myself to move past my problems, understand that they're not inherent to me and therefore be able to work through them, to be able to allow myself to grow as a person and all of these things that she talks about and break cycles of addiction and break cycles of guilt or things along those lines. All of these things are things that Neda explains to you. We think that they're much more likely cases as opposed to generalized, just solve mental health issues, boom, no more mental health issues that come from mindfulness that opening opposition talked about. Before I engage with the problems that we've got supposedly from present government, I will take a POI from opening.
For achieving mindfulness, you have to train your brain a lot, meditation, etc. Once you are able to build your brain like that, it's not so easy to turn off the mindfulness in every moment you want. It's a mental state and therefore a way that your brain used to work. You cannot pick up the moment in which you want to use that and pick up the moment in which you don't want to use it.
I mean, it's just not true. Just like I have the tool of listening really strong to a debate and understanding and tracking exactly what is going on, but in most of my life, that is not what I usually do. I engage in a specific moment in which I want to do that. Most people who meditate don't just randomly fall into a trance for most of the time, mostly because it's really, really hard, as it explains to you. It's not something that you just will slip into for no reason. You have to ask yourself the question and engage with the answer of why you're using this tool in order to use it properly. This is what Neta tells you. But let's talk about the two things that come out of HUJI. One, they try and tell me, otherwise everyone would just go to a therapist and they'd use it much better. One, we just don't think, well, see why this is the realistic case in the vast majority of the problems or the kinds of problems this actually solves that Neta tells you about. Two, if mindfulness still isn't solving your problems, we think then it makes sense that the next step is going to be therapy. Therapists are probably going to likely use this as the language with which they sell this to you to make it easier and more accessible for you to go to that therapy as the next step of mindfulness and solving all the problems. We don't see why it blocks it us. The second of all, they try and tell you, I won't go and demand from my boss a better thing because I'm not overwhelmed with anger. We don't understand why you need to be overwhelmed with anger in order to enter that that situation, as opposed to taking a moment to allow yourself to calm down, to rationally think about what the next best step to take your slightly more mild anger is in order to engage with the problem and therefore actually get to the best result is, why that's not a better situation. For all these reasons, please oppose.
I'd like to thank the opposition whip and all the speakers for a very fine debate. I will now ask you to leave the room to leave us hold the deliberation. Just quickly checking a scene. I suppose we are now channeling after the live stream, otherwise the deliberation is not going to be an objective one.
They told us that we're supposed to stay here.
Yes, I will.
Okay, so you're opening a room for us or something?
Yeah, I think we move. I think we move is the plan.
Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
So I've sent you an invitation.
Thanks everyone for the debate.
Speakers, please stay here and wait for an OA. They will be back in 20 minutes, so you can just stay here.
Okay, sorry everyone, it was a long discussion, but for the record, I blame you. Quick checkup that all teams are here before we begin the oral adjudication. So OG? OO?
Yeah, Romee is coming here now, but she'll be in 10 seconds.
Sure. CG? CO? Okay, so as you've seen, we've had a long discussion in which genuinely all teams were considered and discussed. We ended up in a one unanimous decision, the rest being on a 3-to-1 split. So the first unanimously goes to opening opposition. Then the rest of the debate. Second goes to closing opposition. Third, very closely to CG, which was probably the closest comparison in the debate. And fourth, unfortunately, to opening government. Let's understand why and what happened, starting with the top half comparison. So firstly, I'm going to explain this adjudication based on two main questions. Firstly, decision-making, and secondly, what I'm going to call, for lack of a better term, good feels. So what do we get from both teams? From opening government, we get mainly some constructive on the decision-making process. We get from opening government the following ideas. Firstly, it is crucial to consider your future implications of your decisions in order to get good decisions to actually change your future for the better. Secondly, it is important to understand that your situation in the first place is bad and not just accept it in order to try and make a change. Thirdly, it is important to understand what have led to the present situation that you are in order to be able to change from it for the better. And lastly, it is, okay, the rest will already be more in engagement from opening opposition. So let's bring in opening opposition here. So what do we get in engagement from opening opposition? Firstly, opening opposition point quite well at an underlying assumption from opening government that is kind of important for their case to stand. And that is that people use to access this tool of mindfulness. OO says, insofar as A, we have balance on our side because there are also other competing social narratives, such as capitalism, such as the constant daily reminders of the many hardships that you suffer from, etc. It is unlikely that you will completely not think of all of the problems or think of the future, etc., because there are many of other pressures to do so. Secondly, it is just very not likely for you to use it a lot in general because you have many different reasons to use it mildly, because the fact that commercialization usually leads to people using this low key, like the sort of things that you are advocating for are apps or read a book once in a while, etc. And just generally the fact that it is extremely hard to stay in this situation throughout the everyday of your life because life continues happening and you get daily reminders of how hard situations are, etc. To which OG will try to respond with the following mechanisms. OG will say, firstly, we think that you are likely to, even if you do it only occasionally, need to practice for it, thus rewiring your brain to always think this way, meaning that you are always going to act on this manner. And secondly, the idea of a sort of, forgot for a minute the term in English, the confirmation bias, that was the term, yes. The sort of confirmation bias mechanism that is likely to lead you to think that you're just not doing it enough, that you need to do it more and more and more in order to continue and solve your problems. So I will say from the get-go, we did feel like the confirmation bias idea was a tad bit under-analyzed, but rather just thrown there as a potential idea of something that could happen. But also, in terms of direct engagement that it got from opening opposition, we still get the following. So firstly, you're not likely to completely rewire your brain because here what OO brings to us again is the competing narratives. And they say it is likely that yes, you might rewire your brain to also include this tool, but your brain is also still wired to include other tools as well and still have constant reminders in which they remind us that OG is not completely comparative to the other narratives existing in society. Secondly, the fact that it is likely that the people who advertise it for you don't want you to fall into this confirmation bias sort of acting, because as we get from leader of opposition, it is likely that since it is commercialized, you are likely having some sort of a rating system online. You give 5 stars to whatever does you better, meaning that if you get bad results, you're not likely to actually improve that. So you get competition leading to just better sort of mindfulness and not the bad kind of mindfulness that is addictive. Lastly, I will say this, yeah?
Sorry to interrupt. So we had 4 ballots from your room. and not a single one of them were the same. So can you please, could you please clarify some issues that I'm going to send you over Zoom now? Sorry for the delay, everyone. It might be a couple of minutes because, again, there were 3 inconsistencies between the ballots.
Very interesting.
Cool.
So just a sec, I'll read what Alex sent. Okay. Got it? I'll take it as a yes. Okay, moving back to the justification, sorry about that. Another point of response we get from opening opposition here is to flag another thing which we thought was important in terms of the counterfactual, and that is also that the counterfactual is not having mindfulness at all, but rather having non-commercialized mindfulness, in which they argue you are much more likely to become the quote-unquote junkie that OG describes, because then you need a much more sort of buy-in into the movement, you need to actually get involved in the movement, etc. It is not so low-key that you can integrate in your day-to-day life, you are much more presently involved all the time. And secondly, because it is easier then to be sort of abusive on it and actually make you use it to excess without fearing the sort of public backlash or that commercialization leads due to the ranking system that you often get. For those reasons, we will be convinced by opening opposition that in all likelihood, this is not going to infringe on your decisions. We also get one small and nice addition from opening opposition, specifically on the question of decision making, which at times you're likely to even make better decisions because you act somewhat more rationally. I will say a bit underdeveloped, but we do get the idea that it is preferable that if you have had a fight with your girlfriend, you are able to prospect on it objectively and not just go out screaming or break up immediately, because you need to actually be relaxed in order to make the good decisions based on that. For those reasons, we think that OO will win on the grounds of the question of better decision making. As for the second question of good feels, what do we get from both fields? So we get mainly constructive from OO and some rebuttal from OG that I will engage with soon. So the constructive from OO will be mainly that people generally feel a lot of pressure in their day-to-day life because of the alternative social narratives, etc. And they need this sort of mechanism in order to sometimes chill down, relax, and actually be able to reflect on themselves and just not worry so much. OG will tell them 2 responses. Firstly, sometimes the present feels bad. It is not good for people to feel in the moment when in the moment is bad for many people. I will flag here, there is a bit of a tension here between claiming this and what the PM said about you're not aware of you feeling bad if you're doing mindfulness because it is too escapistic. However, I will say regardless of this tension, we think that also there is an implicit response to this in opening opposition when they do say that it's not even implicit, actually, it's explicit, just not like integrated was the word I was looking for. I hate English. I think the response from opening opposition to this is the idea that because mindfulness is not about not acknowledging that you're having a bad feeling, it is about being able to not get too upset about it. We are fine with people living in the moment, even if the moment is bad. They don't need to delve into a circle of pain. They need to realize they have a hardship, but just not beat themselves up over it, to be a bit chilled about it. And comparatively speaking, they argue it is better to still have the in the moment bad feeling that you don't have any feeling of control over and that you're completely sucked into. We think that the second piece of rebuttal from OG was very interesting, but unfortunately underdeveloped, though not directly refuted by opening opposition. And that is the idea of having alternative sort of narratives. The fact that you can have other ways by which to relax. Unfortunately, I think the level to which this rebuttal was developed was saying there could be alternative ways by which you can relax without actually emphasizing or explaining what they are, why they are likely to achieve the same goals, why they are so accessible to people, etc., etc. So while we do think there is a potential for this rebuttal here, and we think that perhaps OO did lack some explanation as to why the mechanism is very unique in its abilities, we do feel that this rebuttal at this point of the debate was not sufficiently developed to actually explain to us why these alternatives are likely to work. For those reasons, OO will win above OG. Before I get to the second half of this debate, are there questions on the top half? Moving down to CG, what do we get from CG as extension? We get from them some ideas. So firstly, we think that probably what we all thought was the most important piece of extension from CG was characterizing the sort of moments in which you are likely to use mindfulness, in which they say, let's take the hard case of, like the strong case of oppositions. We are not going to assume like OG that we are using it all the time like a junkie. We are just going to show to you why even 1 hour a day is 1 hour too much if it is in the wrong time and the wrong moment. The second piece of extension will also be on the counterfactual, and that is the idea that on the counterfactual, people are more likely to seek therapy or otherwise maybe even integrate mindfulness within therapy. Let's see how those two extensions play compared to the top half, and then let's bring in CO and make the actual most complex comparison of this debate of the bottom half. So firstly, in relation to OG, the reason why we thought that CG was above OG are the following. Firstly, we think that indeed we do end up being compelled that they engage the stronger version of oppositions in this debate. We think that at the point at which their case is proven to be more plausible because they don't need to rely on people using it to access, but even if they use it only occasionally, it is bad because the occasions in which they use it, according to the concessions coming from opposition, are mainly the occasions in which they feel bad about themselves. And it is important for them to feel bad because feeling bad is a motivator for action. We think in this, they have a more plausible case than opening government that is somewhat in better engagement with oppositions. We feel that also the counterfactual of therapy could be argued somewhat of a filling in of the link that we are missing on the interesting rebuttal coming from OG about having alternatives. And here they kind of present to us an alternative, and we think that even give somewhat good explanation as to why this alternative could work, especially when they point out how you can integrate within it all of the good stuff about mindfulness without the bad stuff. So we do end up believing that CG have a better case in terms of engagement with the oppositions and one that is more plausible. However, in relation to opening opposition, several issues. I will say firstly, and I think this is something important that we've discussed somewhat, we thought that the counterfactual of therapy specifically was not sufficiently analyzed. To be clear on what we mean by that, we do accept that probably there is an extent of mutual exclusivity. That is, if I take mindfulness, I am less likely to take therapy. What is less clear to us is why, if I don't take mindfulness, I will take therapy, which are two different links to fill in. We think that the first one on mutual exclusivity was fulfilled, but the second, and why on the counterfactual I am likely to go to therapy, was less so. Specifically, when we weigh this counterfactual in comparison to OO, we think something OO established very well is explaining why mindfulness is extremely accessible, unlike CG that didn't analyze why therapy is very accessible. At which point, even if mindfulness is less of a perfect mechanism than therapy, and I think OO even say it explicitly, even if it is less than perfect, it is much more accessible than the alternatives, we are going to take this in comparison over therapy. Then for the more interesting part of the extension from CG, about motivating to action. And I think here it got kind of a similar response from both oppositions. Let's start with OO. From opening opposition, we get the following idea already in response to OG. Yeah, people do maybe need to feel bad, but A, mindfulness doesn't prevent them from feeling bad. It just tones down how bad they feel. Fair enough, CG says. CG will say it is important for them to feel specifically extremely bad because emotion is a motivator for action. And then the link that we are missing is, why is this a motivation for a good action? At the point at which DLO tells us it is preferable for you to approach things rationally, to not break up with your girlfriend or get in an attack of rage, but actually to reflect on what you have experienced and go to address this rationally. It is maybe opposition is happy to concede. a motivator to action, but CG doesn't prove why it is a good sort of course of action, why we need to prefer people to act on their emotions rather than based on their rationale. Secondly, we think that here again, CG has somewhat lacking engagement with OO's explanations as to why I still have a lot of incentive to actually solve my problems. So yes, CG does manage to show to us, unlike OG, that specifically the occasions in which it is most important for me are the ones in which I'm likely to become more passive. But what we are missing here is why the day after I got my enragement, I'm not able to now again still acknowledge with less emotion that I have something that needs change. Here OO will say, yes, maybe in the moments that I need it most, I won't have sufficient motivation, but I will get it eventually because there are sufficient pushes from society to still have this sort of motivation to act. And lastly, I will say in relation to OO, we also felt there was also somewhat a bit of a lack in engagement with the counterfactual of media consuming mindfulness in a non-commercial manner that we think OO established would lead to probably much worse of the implications that CG describes, because these are more abusable and less likely to me act rationally upon them. For those reasons, CG will be above their opening, but below opening opposition. Before I bring in CO to the discussion, are there questions on any of what I've just said? Cool. CO. So, firstly, what is the extension of CO? Because a lot of it will be similar to opening opposition, but let's explain what parts are new. So firstly, we think that there is different, not necessarily better, but different analysis from CO as to why people are not likely to use it to access. So they give different mechanisms than their opening. For an instance, the fact that it is extremely mentally like consuming and requires my focus to do it, meaning that I'm not likely to do it most of the time. Or the fact that I am likely to treat it like a tool because this is the sort of things that people think of when they go to mindfulness in the first place. That is, when I download these apps or whatever, I'm thinking of it in my mindsets as a tool, meaning that I know that I intend to use it sometimes, like I sometimes read, but I don't have to do it all the time just because I learned it. And I don't have to do it all the time. So I have the ability to pick and choose what are the right occasions in which I want to use it. A second piece of extension we think we got from CO are some new impacts from opening opposition. So it's not just the sort of chilling effect, but also the ability to maybe use it to better my relationships, maybe the fact that I'm more able to focus on my hobbies, etc. So let's see how it engages with governments and then how it engages with OO. So firstly, on opening government, we feel that CO did manage to demonstrate with a different mechanism than opening opposition why the characterization of opening government of me using it to access is not one that is extremely likely. Why it means that I am likely to actually use it only some occasions. We think that they also don't have only competing analysis, but also actually direct refutations to the mechanisms given by opening government for why I am likely to use it to access, because opening government gives us the idea of I am likely to need to rewire my brain, to which CO responds quite directly. Yeah, I also need to rewire my brain in order to learn how to read or how to code, but it doesn't mean that I need to use it all the time. It is still a tool that I'm able to choose when and when not to use. So we do think that in terms of direct engagement, CO does sufficiently to show that OG's harms are not likely because I'm not likely to use it on every occasion, leading to irrational decision making. As for CG and where it became close, here's what we think the CO-CG comparison came down to. So let's see the two main extensions from CG and how CO engages them, because the main thing CO will win CG on is engagement. So firstly, on the extension of the counterfactual of therapy, we think CO gives some rebuttals to it to make us believe that it is not a likely counterfactual. So firstly, the fact that many people don't want to go to therapy, it is perceived in their mind as some sort of a very big deal or extreme solution when most of them have a very daily small problems. So they are likely to do something as little as download an app for it, but not likely to do something as big as go to a therapist for it. We think that also, secondly here, CO will also tell us that often going to therapy is something that is just less accessible to many people because of them not wanting to think like what the sort of the thing that they need is a therapist. Like they won't say the word stigma for some reason, but they will kind of explain the term stigma by saying people don't want to think that to rationalize to themselves that their problems are that big, etc. So we do think that given that CG didn't in fact have a lot of analysis on why this is the likely counterfactual, we are not too set. We are willing to accept CO's characterization that it is not likely we'll go to therapy. Then for the second part of the extension from CG, about me using it in the right occasions. We think here, similar to OO, CO will give a same response, but again with a different explanation. Not necessarily better, but different. CO will again say, yes, we agree that emotion is a strong motivator to act. We just think that it is a bad motivator to act. Or to use the direct quote from Opposition Week, it is preferable for you to go rationally and negotiate the terms and conditions of your workplace with your boss, rather than you going in a jealous rage and completely, to quote the government whip, quitting on your job, which is probably a less preferable outcome in most situations. So we do think that by the end of it, CO again manages to show, slightly different than OO, that there is a reason to believe that it is not good for you to be motivated and act by your emotions. I will say also further than this, because this was very close, we think another factor in to the fact that CO weighed above CG at the end is, while CO did have these direct refutations to CG, we didn't identify a lot of direct engagement from CG to CO's extension. To be clear, we think that CG had a lot of good sort of back and forth on some of the mitigations from CO. They try to show, here's why our case might still stand, here is why it is likely that we use it only in the right occasions, etc. Or what they say in the main part of the extension from CO, we agree that people are not going to use it all the time and are only going to use it to solve their problems, which is bad because we want them to solve them otherwise. But we don't think that they have rebuttal to the rest of the extension that is not even contingent on problem solving, but rather just me being able to, in the moment, have a better sort of relationship, be more focused on my hobbies, to actually be involved in the day-to-day happiness that I might feel without needing to worry about the rest of my life. So we think that here we get, even if it doesn't solve the grand scheme problem of things as CG wants things to happen, it does just give a short-term tangible benefit that wasn't directly refuted by CG, at which point we are slightly marginally leaning towards CO for this some sort of impact that does remain standing after they did engage a lot of CG's extension. One last thing that I will say about this comparison before I move to the opposition bench. Another thing that we were slightly missing from CG, which again, marginally tips the scale a bit in the benefit of CO, is a bit on why this sort of collective action that they describe is likely to happen on the counterfactual. So again, we get from them a lot of analysis on one side of the comparison, why I am not likely to start a strike or whatever when I'm relaxed and sort of accepting the situation, but we don't get as much why without mindfulness, I am likely to do the collective action, start a strike and everything workers' rights related. Whereas from CO, we do get a slightly more comparative analysis on why their benefits are unique to their side and are likely to happen under their side. For all those reasons, marginally speaking, CO above CG. As for the opposition bench comparison, we felt that firstly, being the case that CO brought different but not necessarily better reasons than their opening, it is kind of their burden to weigh why their reasonings are better than their openings. We feel that the weighing that they did give of saying opening never characterized when you are likely to do this is kind of uncharitable towards the analysis actually coming from OO that did analyze why you're likely to do it only in situations that you actually want or need it, and you're likely to pick and choose, which is exactly what the terminology that OO themselves used. Secondly, even if it is the case, it is not completely clear to us why this particular link is more important than all of the other additions that we get uniquely from OO and not from CO, like the counterfactual being worse kind of mindfulness, like the fact that OO does give us other reasons to believe why we get a balance that is OO in a way is a bit more comparative in their analysis, because they explain why the counterfactual wouldn't just be us not having a lot of relaxation, but us feeling actively stressed, like the sort of active harm by pointing out that the counterfactual has a lot of bad sort of social narratives that are not balanced by anything. So like it's not that CO wasn't able in any way to weigh above OO. It's not a completely unwinnable margin, but we do think that without the active weighing that is charitable towards OO's case, we will end up putting OO above CO. Sorry, it was lengthy. Are there any questions on the call as a whole? Cool. I believe we're still live streamed. Usually what I do now is offer feedback for anyone who wants to stay, though I'm not sure if you want your feedback to be streamed, so just checking if we have a volunteer here or anything. Otherwise, we might go to Discord. Asim, are you here?
I mean, we would like feedback.
And I don't really mind it being live streamed. My parents might enjoy it.
Okay, so I'm gonna do it this way. I'm gonna start the feedback here because convenience and stuff. If anyone feels uncomfortable about their feedback being streamed, then approach me later, text me on Facebook or Discord or wherever. I'll try to check into this. I will say I very highly prefer giving the feedback orally rather than writing it because so much feedbacks recently. So preferably if you approach me later, let's find a way to communicate orally. I'm going to assume that everyone who stays here wants feedback now.
No, thank you.
We're going to contact you later. Thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks a lot. We're also going to contact later over the board if that's okay.
No worries.
Everyone for the debate. Talk to you later. Bye.